The advertisement had taken Ward Dunmore exactly 14 words to write, which told Celia everything she needed to know about the man before she ever met him. Rancher, widower, 4 daughters, Alberta foothills. Looking for capable woman, respond only if serious. She had read it twice at the kitchen table of her sister's house in Winnipeg. In the small hours of a November morning, when the wind off the prairie made the windows flex, and she could not sleep, for calculating how many more weeks she could stay before she became a weight. Her sister's husband could no longer afford to pretend he didn't feel. James had been gone 18 months. The typhoid took him in July and left her with nothing but the house, which turned out to be more debt than asset, and a schoolteacher's pride that was increasingly difficult to feed. She wrote back the next morning. Not because the advertisement moved her. Not because she had any particular feeling about Alberta. Because she was 28 years old, widowed, and out of options that didn't require swallowing more of herself than she had left to swallow. The CPR train dropped her at the junction outside Copper Flat on a Wednesday in late September, and the first thing she noticed was how much sky there was. Not the flat gray sky of Winnipeg in autumn, but something vaster and more honest, the kind of sky that made a person feel both very small and very clear about where they stood. The settlement itself was modest. A post office that doubled as a dry goods store, a livery, a church with a crooked steeple, and a scattering of buildings that gave the impression of people who had arrived with intentions, and then been humbled by the landscape into something more practical. A man named Bertram Oakes ran the post office and informed her, without being asked, that Ward Dunmore was a fair man but not an easy one, and that the Dunmore daughters were good girls who had been through more than girls their age ought to bear. She thanked him and did not ask for more. The Dunmore ranch appeared over a long rise of ground, and Celia's first honest assessment was that it was a place working hard to hold on. The main house was solid, hewn timber, 2 good chimneys, a deep-covered porch, but the yard wore the particular exhaustion of somewhere that had been managed by someone with too much to manage. The fence line on the south side had a section repaired with boards that didn't quite match. The kitchen garden had gone to seed. A single crow sat on the gatepost and regarded her arrival without concern. She had barely lifted her bag from the wagon when the front door opened and 4 girls came out. They came out the way children do when they've learned to expect the worst from new arrivals. Carefully, in order of age, faces arranged into expressions designed to give nothing away. The oldest was tall, perhaps 16, with dark hair and careful eyes. She held herself with the rigid competence of someone who had been running a household for years and resented both the necessity and the fact that no one had acknowledged it. The youngest, 6, maybe 7, stood at the end of the line gripping the hand of the girl beside her, her eyes moving over Celia with the frank, unguarded curiosity of a child who hasn't yet decided whether hope is worth the risk. "I'm Celia Drummond," she said. "I'm looking for your father." The oldest one said, "He's in the barn." Flat voice, no hostility, but no welcome either. He said to wait. "All right." Celia set her bag on the porch step. "What's your name?" A pause, as though the question surprised her. "Gwen." She pointed down the line with the mechanical efficiency of someone who has recited this before. "Lottie, Faye, Birdie." Lottie was perhaps 13, lean and watchful. Faye, 9 or so, studied the ground. Birdie, the youngest, looked at Celia with an expression caught precisely between wariness and something more dangerous than wariness. Celia sat down on the porch chair. It creaked but held. After a moment, Birdie detached herself from the line and climbed the porch steps and stood 3 feet away. "Your coat is the color of pine needles," she said. "It is," Celia agreed. "Mama had a green dress." Birdie said it the way small children say true things, directly without understanding that the statement might land like a stone dropped in still water. "Papa put it in the cedar chest after she died. He said it was for keeping." Celia looked at her. "When did she die?" 3 winters ago." Birdie paused. "I was 4. I don't really remember her face right, just her hands." She held out her own small hands and considered them. "She had soft hands, I remember that part." There was nothing to say that wouldn't be wrong in some direction. "That's a good thing to remember," Celia said. Birdie looked at her for a long moment with those careful eyes. Then she sat down on the step in front of Celia and tucked her knees to her chest and didn't say anything else, which was its own kind of answer. Ward Dunmore came around the corner of the barn 30 minutes later. She heard him before she saw him, heavy, deliberate footsteps, the walk of a man who had decided long ago that efficiency was worth more than ease. He was broader than she'd pictured, built close and solid, with a beard that was a week past tidy and hands that looked like they'd earned every callus twice over. He was perhaps 42 or 43, and he wore it the way the land wore winter. without complaint, without apology, and without any particular interest in whether you found it difficult. He stopped when he saw her on the porch. For just a fraction of a second, something crossed his face. She couldn't name it, and then it was gone. Miss Drummond. Mr. Dunmore. He looked at her bag, at Bertie, who had fallen asleep against the porch rail, at her face, briefly, the way a man looks at a situation he is calculating. Supper's whatever the girls put together, he said. I didn't know exactly when you'd arrive. That's fine. Wedding's Friday. Reverend Hicks comes through on the weekly circuit. Friday is fine. He nodded, as though they'd agreed on something unremarkable, and turned to go back toward the barn. Mr. Dunmore, she said. He stopped, turned. It's good to meet you, she said. She meant it plainly. Not warmly, not coldly, just as a fact. He looked at her for a moment. Likewise, he said, in the tone of a man who has said the word so many times as a formality that he is no longer entirely certain whether he means it. Then he went back to the barn, and Celia sat in the creaking chair and looked out at the foothills, turning amber in the late afternoon light, and thought, well, here we are. The wedding happened on a Friday morning that tasted of early frost. Reverend Hicks moved through the words with a gentleness Celia appreciated. The four girls stood in a row. Gwen watched the floor. Lottie watched the window. Faye held Bertie's hand. Bertie watched Celia with those steady 6-year-old eyes. When it was done, there was no cake, but there was tea, and Celia had been awake at 4 in the morning and had made biscuits because the kitchen had been there and she'd needed something to do with her hands. Bertie ate 3. Gwen ate 1, and did not look at her while she ate it. That evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Ward stood in the kitchen doorway while she cleaned the cups. You didn't have to make biscuits, he said. I was awake. He was quiet a moment. She turned to look at him. He was leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, not hostile, just present in that watchful, contained way she was beginning to recognize as simply how he occupied space. I'm not a romantic, she said. I'm not here because I had a dream about Alberta or because I expected this to be easy. I'm here because I needed to be somewhere, and this somewhere needed someone. I'll do right by your family. That's what I can promise. He held her gaze for a long moment. It's worth something, he said finally. Then he went upstairs, and she stood alone in the kitchen and felt the full weight of everything she'd walked into pressing in from all sides. Not despair, not joy. Something in the complicated territory between them, where most real things happen. She picked up the last cup and finished washing it. By the end of the first week, she understood the shape of what she'd come into. The pantry was the first problem. Not immediately obvious. Someone had arranged things to look more plentiful than they were, but by the 4th day she was counting and calculating, and by the 6th day she filled half a page of her notebook with figures that didn't work. Flour for perhaps 3 weeks. Salt pork insufficient for a hard winter, potatoes in the root cellar, but fewer than 6 people needed to see through January and February. She sat with the inventory at the kitchen table after the house had gone quiet and thought about it carefully. She learned later it had been Gwen arranging the shelves. Gwen, who was 16 and had been running this household since she was 13, who managed the kitchen with the efficiency of someone for whom efficiency was not a choice but a survival strategy. The second problem announced itself on a Tuesday afternoon when she went to check the supply shed and found it padlocked. She found Gwen splitting wood in the yard. The supply shed's locked, Celia said. It's always locked. Gwen didn't stop working. Papa has the key. I need to take stock of what's out there. I'm managing the household, and I need to know what we have. Gwen set down the axe and looked at her with those dark, measured eyes. A long moment passed. You know this place better than anyone, Celia said. I'm not trying to take anything over. I just need to understand what I'm working with. Gwen looked at the axe handle, then at the ground, then, come on then. They sat at the kitchen table with Celia's notebook between them, and Gwen went through the figures with a precision that was striking. She knew the exact count, the exact shortfall, the exact weeks remaining on every staple. She was 16 years old and had been carrying this knowledge alone. You're short for winter, Celia said when they'd gone through everything. I know. What was the plan? Gwen was quiet for a moment. Papa was going to sell 2 head before the freeze, make up the gap. She paused. He hasn't. What's stopping him? Gwen picked up the pencil and turned it in her fingers without writing anything. Every animal he sells is something he built. He thinks of it as losing ground. She stopped. He'd rather find another way. He's been finding another way for 2 years. Celia closed the notebook. I'm going to speak to him. Gwen's head came up sharply. I wouldn't. I know you wouldn't, Celia said, not unkindly. But I'm not you. She found Ward at the north fence line in the gray afternoon, resetting a post. She waited until he stopped to breathe. We're short on provisions for winter, she said. He looked at her. I'm handling it. You told Gwen you were selling 2 head. Something moved in his jaw. Not anger, but something colder and more controlled than anger. Gwen talks too much. Gwen has been keeping this household from going under for 2 years, Celia said evenly. She doesn't talk enough. She talked to me because I asked her directly and because she needed someone to ask. She paused. When are you selling the cattle? A muscle worked. When I decide to. We have 5 weeks before the hard freeze and not enough food for 4 growing girls. She kept her voice level. I understand what selling feels like to you, but the numbers don't care about feelings. He turned away and drove the post once, twice. The sound carried flat across the open ground. She stayed. After the 3rd strike, he stopped. His shoulders moved with the effort of it. He didn't turn around. 2 head, he said to the fence post. I'll arrange it Thursday. She let the silence sit. Thank you. She walked back toward the house. Behind her, she heard the mallet come down once more. A single different blow. The difference between a man hitting something because he's angry and a man completing a task. In her experience, that was where everything important lived. She found the recipe tin on the 3rd week, in the back of the kitchen cabinet behind a cast iron pan that hadn't been moved in some time. She knew what it was immediately from the handwriting on the cards. Careful, slanted, the writing of someone who'd taken time with things. Someone who had cared about what she was recording. The tin had belonged to Ward's wife. Mabel, Bertie had told her once, saying the name easily, the way she said everything, as though she understood it needed to be said before it disappeared entirely. Celia sat at the table that evening and went through the cards slowly. Some were stained with use. All were handled enough to show they'd been worked through many times. Small notes in the margins in the same careful hand. Add more butter in winter when the cream is richer. Faye prefers less salt. Bertie won't eat onion if she can see it. She made the oat bread the next morning. Card number 4, between a soup recipe and something for dried apple cake. When the girls came down for breakfast, Bertie stopped in the kitchen doorway. She didn't say anything. She stood very still, and Celia watched her face do something complicated. The expression of a child encountering something she'd thought was gone. Sit down, Celia said quietly. Eat it while it's hot. Bertie sat. She took a piece and held it in both hands and looked at it, and then she ate it. She didn't cry. She was 6 and working very hard not to. Celia could see it in the set of her small jaw, in the careful way she chewed. When breakfast was done, Bertie came to where Celia was standing at the stove and pressed her forehead against Celia's arm for just a moment, the way a child does when they have no words for something, and their body goes ahead without them. Celia put one hand on the back of her head for a second. That was all. Ward had come in from the cold and was standing in the doorway. She didn't acknowledge him, and he didn't say anything, and after a moment she heard him pour his coffee and sit down. The real confrontation came on a Sunday evening in October, and it began, as most things in that house began, not with the thing it was actually about. It was Lottie who started it. 13, the one who held herself closed so thoroughly that Celia had spent weeks watching for any gap. It started over who had left the henhouse latch undone, which had been Faye's responsibility, and Lottie said Faye never did anything right, and Faye said she always got blamed, and the argument escalated with the speed of arguments that are not about the henhouse at all. That's enough, Ward said. Controlled, managed, the voice of a man who has made controlling himself into a daily discipline. Why does it always end there? Lottie's voice cracked, not from tears but from pressure, from what happens when something is held compressed too long and finally finds the crack. Why does everything just stop before it gets said? We're not fine. We haven't been fine since? She stopped herself, or tried to. The word she didn't say landed in the kitchen anyway. Faye had gone white. Bertie had put down her spoon. Ward looked at the table. Sit down, Lottie, Celia said. Lottie's eyes snapped to her, the specific challenge of a girl who has been managing herself alone for years. You are not my mother. Not because you're wrong, Celia said. Sit down because this conversation deserves to happen properly. Lottie sat. Celia looked around the table. At Ward, who had gone to the flat, controlled blankness he retreated to when things came too close. At Gwen, whose jaw was tight. At Faye, who looked like she was trying to disappear into her chair. Lottie's right, she said, and everyone at this table knows it. She let it land. This family has been managing on that's enough for a long time. It's a way of surviving. It's not a way of living. Ward looked at her. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not withdrawal. The look of a man who has been accused of something true and cannot find an argument against it. What would you have us do? He said quietly. Talk about her, Celia said. About what it's been like. About what you miss. She looked at Bertie, then back at Ward. Bertie talks about her mother more than any of you combined, because she didn't learn yet that she's not supposed to. Silence, the stove ticked. The wind pressed against the kitchen window. Then Lottie said, in a voice that was very small for someone her age. I forgot what her voice sounded like. She looked at the table. I've been trying to remember, and I can't get it right anymore. Something happened in the kitchen then. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in stories where one admission unlocks everything cleanly. It was messier than that. It was Ward making a sound he cut off immediately, his hand going flat on the table. It was Gwen, who had not let herself cry in front of anyone in 3 years, looking toward the window with her jaw working. It was Bertie climbing off her chair and going to Lottie and pressing her small shoulder against her older sister's arm without a word. The unself-conscious comfort of a child who doesn't know yet that comfort should be harder than this. It was Faye, after a long moment, saying very quietly, she used to hum when she was cooking. I can still hear that part. The kitchen held all of it. Celia got up quietly and refilled the pot and set more bread on the table, and stayed present but out of the way, while the Dunmore family did the thing they had not done in 3 years, the painful, necessary work of grieving out loud in the same room together. It didn't go smoothly. Nothing real is smooth. There were silences that lasted too long, and moments where someone said something that landed wrong. Ward said almost nothing through most of it, but he stayed in his chair, which was its own form of participation, the participation of a man who has decided for once not to leave. At some point, without anyone marking the moment, his hand found Bertie's hair and stayed there. She leaned into it with the complete trust of a small child who has just been given back something she thought was gone. When it was over, not resolved, because these things don't resolve, they only open, Ward looked at Celia across the table. Thank you, he said. She nodded once. She didn't make anything more of it than that. Winter came hard and stayed. In February, on an evening when the temperature had dropped past anything reasonable and the girls were in bed and the house had settled into its night sounds, Ward came and sat across from Celia at the kitchen table. She was working on the accounts. He had a cup of tea he wasn't drinking. I wrote that advertisement the way I did, he said, because I didn't want to want something from it. Mabel died and I decided that wanting things was how you lost them, so I wanted as little as possible. He looked at his hands. I put up a good fence and kept my head down and told myself the girls were fine, told myself we were managing. She waited. Gwen was 13 when her mother died, he said. His throat worked. She shouldn't have been carrying what she's been carrying. None of them should. No, Celia said, they shouldn't. He looked at the table, then at her. He was not an easy man, and she had known that from the 14 words of his advertisement, and she had not come expecting him to become one. But there was something in his face now that she hadn't seen in September. Something present, something actually there. I've been thinking, he said slowly, that I wrote not looking for romance because it was true then, but things change. He paused, the most uncertain she'd ever seen him. Not the uncertainty of a man assessing a situation, but the personal kind, the kind that costs something to show. I'd like this to be a real marriage, if that's something you're open to. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the Alberta wind did what the Alberta wind does, moved across everything without apology. She thought about Winnipeg, about the table in her sister's kitchen, and the advertisement and the coffee that had gone cold. She thought about Bertie's forehead against her arm, and Lottie's voice saying, I can't get it right anymore. She thought about this house, which was not easy, and had not become easy and would not. She thought about how she was still here. Yes, she said, that's something I'm open to. He held her gaze. Then he nodded, the particular nod of a man who has said something and means it and intends to honor it. From Ward Dunmore she had learned that was as binding as anything said in a church. Spring came to the Alberta foothills in April the way it always came there, grudgingly, then all at once. The kitchen garden was planted. The accounts were balanced for the first time in 3 years in a way that held. Ward had sold the 2 head in October and 2 more in February, and had not spoken about it as defeat, which was something. Gwen had started tentatively to act her age. Not always, not without setbacks, but in small moments Celia recognized and did not comment on, because commenting would make them smaller. Lottie had found the recipe tin and was working her way through it with the focused attention she brought to everything. She had not asked permission. She had simply begun. Celia moved aside and let her. Faye had stopped blaming herself for things she hadn't done. This was slow work and not finished, but she was working on it. Bertie remained herself, direct, curious, full of questions that required actual answers. On the first warm evening of the year, they ate supper on the porch, all 6 of them with the foothills turning gold in the late light, and the air carrying the first real warmth it had managed since October. Ward poured his coffee and looked out at the land and said, without looking at anyone in particular, "My father built this place with his hands and told me to take care of it. He meant the land." He paused. He had been pausing like this more lately, before the things that mattered. I think he meant more than the land. Nobody said anything. Then Bertie said, "Celia made the oat bread again." "I noticed," Ward said. "It's the right kind," Bertie said, "like Mama used to make." Ward looked at Celia. She looked back at him. The evening light was the clear, still kind that comes when spring is finally decided, and in it his face was more open than she had ever seen it. "She taught me," Celia said. He absorbed this. Something in him settled, not dramatically, but in the way ground settles when it has been disturbed and is finding its level again. Gwen raised her cup, without ceremony, without announcement, in the way of someone who has decided a thing is worth marking, but is too practical to make a production of it. "To the ranch," she said. They raised their cups. Ward last, looking at each of his daughters in turn, then at Celia, holding his cup toward her with the gravity of a man who does not make gestures lightly, and means this one completely. Celia sat at the table full of people who had not expected her, and could not now imagine doing without her, and felt the word she had been afraid to use settle quietly into place, not as a declaration, not as something she needed to announce. Just as a fact, simple and solid as the foothills behind them, as stubborn as anything that had come through winter and was still standing. She was home.